Coming to you from the shores of gorgeous Lake Michigan, welcome to the National Writers Series, celebrating 15 years as a year-round book festival and the premier home for passionate readers who love inspiring conversations with award-winning authors. Tonight, we welcome #1 New York Times bestselling and Pulitzer Prize-winning author, Rick Atkinson. His latest book, The Fate of Day, is the second installment in his American Revolution Trilogy. Atkinson's brilliant account of the lethal conflict between the Americans and the British offers not only deeply researched and dramatic history, but also a new perspective on the demands that a democracy makes on its citizens. He earned 3 Pulitzer Prizes, 1 for national reporting and 2 for history, and is best known for his Liberation Trilogy. Rick Atkinson has received numerous prestigious honors throughout his career, including the George Polk Award and the Gerald R. Ford Award for his contributions to journalism and historical writing. Rick Atkinson will be joined by our guest host, Doug Stanton, a #1 New York Times bestselling author of In Harm's Way and 12 Strong. Doug is an alum of Interlochen Arts Academy and co-founded the National Writers Series in 2009 with his wife Anne and attorney Grant Parsons. The National Writers Series salutes our amazing audiences, dedicated volunteers, and generous supporters for helping us raise the next generation of readers and writers through our free education programs across the region. This season of amazing authors is made possible through major support by the Green Brick Foundation, Northgard Technology Group, Golden Fowler Home Furnishings, Prout Financial, and Ward and Mary Bevins Gillette. Tonight's event is presented by Lola Jackson and Dillis Tosteson Garcia. Tonight's event is underwritten by Wayne and Terry Lobdell and a generous friend of the National Writers Series. Tonight's live streaming is exclusively underwritten by Nancy Davey. Thanks to our major media sponsor, the Traverse City Record Eagle, and our media partner, Interlochen Public Radio. For information on future events, programs, and how to support our nonprofit work, please visit nationalwriterseries.org. Now, please welcome to the stage #1 New York Times bestselling author, Doug Stanton.
Are you ready for a little history tonight? You're in for a treat with Rick Atkinson. He's a terrific writer, a wonderful person, and he was kind enough today to speak to the Writers Studio at North Ed, to the creative writing students there, headed by Teresa Scollin. He did a wonderful masterclass with those students, a rare treat for them, truly an honor. So thank you, Rick, once again. I want to just say a few things. It is, quote, history night tonight in the Opera House, and what a building this is for just such an event. And I want to ask you a question. Do you ever just stand somewhere and wish you could see into the past? Like you look at something and you think, I wonder all the things that happened, in that very spot. I wish I could just push a button and go backwards in time. Time is so funny. It can seem like it'd take forever, but it also can be over in the blink of an eye. And studying history is one way to kind of transport ourselves into that past. And Rick's work, The Fate of the Day, which I think I see some of you have with you tonight, is an astonishing look at 1777 to 1780, the foundation of this country, which we talk a lot about today in the news. We read about it in the newspaper. Well, where did we really come from? How did we get here? That's the question that we're going to talk about tonight a little bit, how he wrote the book, and what he might be working on next. As you saw in the video roll, he's had a storied career. He's one of the few people I know who says he blundered into his life's work. He told his alumni magazine for his college that he didn't really intend to become a writer, but yet he won the Pulitzer Prize 3 times for some amazing work. One of those connections is this. While tonight's discussion refers to 1777 and 1780 during the American Revolution, the woods and dunes beyond these brick walls were inhabited primarily by the Anishinaabe people, primarily the Odawa and Ojibwe, living in settlements and camps and relying on fishing, hunting, and gathering. It's interesting to think about that. European and American settlement came later in the 1830s and 40s. So it wasn't until 1892 that this building rose on Front Street 27 years after America's Civil War. You can think, however, of this as America's second Civil War, as Rick points out, because the American Revolution was its first. pitching loyalist and rebel citizens against each other, the first fighting for sovereignty over the British Crown and the second for American independence. So, to come back to this question, where have we been that we've arrived at this moment tonight here together in this room? How do we understand our commonalities, our differences, our shared stories? What do we share? And we do this by studying history. Because we're studying history tonight, we're going to take a brief look at a snapshot that you might of a place you might all recognize. It's a 1-minute video produced by an emerging nonprofit in our area called the Grand Traverse Heritage Council. You don't know about it yet, but you will soon. The council's mission is the celebration of the uncommon people, places, and things of this region's history. This fascinating clip you're about to see is part of a larger documentary project that they have that's called Look Beyond the Frame. And we're going to look beyond the frame about what we think we know about the past and try to connect our life today with that history. So when you leave the Opera House tonight, you can look out at the lakeshore and you'll see the same landscape. But for the moment, though, the date is 1908, and shipping, electricity, and autos are bringing change to this northern, isolated village. If you could roll the clip now.
At the turn of the 20th century, America was in the midst of an epic transition. Even isolated destinations like Traverse City, Michigan, were developing rapidly through industries like logging, agriculture, and tourism. These industries relied on Traverse City's docks to ship their cargo throughout the Great Lakes region and across the United States. Imagine standing on those historic docks in 1908. Towering steam-powered ships floated into the harbor, carrying passengers and mail from distant shores. Horse-drawn carriages and bicycles whizzed by, and dock workers loaded giant stacks of lumber from forests nearby. Using an archival photo from storied photographer Orson Peck, we'll take you beyond the frame to uncover the rich history of Traverse City's famous waterfront. In a single image, photography can capture an era and show us exactly how our ancestors lived, worked, and helped build the world we enjoy today. Join us on this time-traveling adventure to explore the Queen City of the North.
When I see that, I see things differently about my hometown, and I think you might too. Stay in touch. If you want to know more, the Grand Traverse Heritage Council, the grandtraverseheritage.org. Stay tuned for more information about them, but we thought it was just appropriate on a night like this to kind of introduce them to the community and show that clip. Rick Atkinson is our preeminent historian and stylist in narrative history. He's a graduate of East Carolina University and University of Chicago, where he majored in English. That work would take him eventually to the Washington Post, where he would serve as Mideast bureau chief, and from that build a career that was prize-winning. His work as a narrative nonfiction writer is as immersive as a novel. The research is epic, and the twining of fact and action is astonishing. By way of introduction and finishing this introduction of Rick, I want to quote him partially here. He once wrote, "The author Shelby Foote once said that a fact is not a truth until you love it." I love that idea. I believe that my strength as a writer and a historian comes from finding facts to love, teasing coherence and intimacy from the past. One of the narrative historian's tasks is to harness scholarship and lucid storytelling to bring back the dead, to breathe life into figures who can seem impossibly remote to a 21st century reader. I think we'll all agree that Rick Atkinson brings the past alive in our very hands when we read his books. Please welcome him now to the NWS stage, Rick Atkinson. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Doug. That was very nice. I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here and inviting me to Traverse City.
I want you to set the stage for the fate of the day for us. You do not have to have read the first volume, The British Are Coming, in your American Revolutionary War trilogy. But where are we in 1777? When we open this book, who do we meet, first off?
Yeah, well, this book begins with the first volume, The British Are Coming, ends. The first couple of years of the war have been very fraught. General Washington, the Continental Army have nearly lost the cause a couple of times, and it's redeemed at the end of the book and at the end of 1776 when Washington, out of desperation, and he is desperate, decides to cross famously the Delaware River on Christmas night, 1776, and attacks and destroys the German garrison, the Hessians, in Trenton. And then a week later he does it again. He crosses again, and he destroys the British rear garrison in Princeton. And then they go into winter quarters. In 18th century warfare, not much happens during the dead of winter. This book picks up not in Pennsylvania, not in New Jersey, but in Versailles. And we meet immediately the King and the Queen of France. The King is Louis XVI. His Queen is the beautiful, spendthrift Austrian Marie Antoinette, known around the French court as Madame Deficit. And we spend time with them, and I introduce them to the reader because the game at this point for the Americans is to persuade the French to come into the war full bore on behalf of the American rebellion. They have been providing clandestine aid, gunpowder, weapons, and so on, but what we need is them to send a navy and an army. The man charged with persuading the Catholic absolute monarch, Louis XVI, that it's in his best interest to throw in with Protestant wannabe Republicans intent on waging war against their lawful monarch is Benjamin Franklin. And he has been sent to France in December of 1776 as our first and, as it turns out, greatest diplomat with this heavy lift to perform diplomatically. So we see this right at the beginning of this book because that's the game for the Americans at this point.
And you call Franklin a rock star.
Yeah. I don't use that language in the book, but he is a rock star. He's the most famous American by far in the world as a consequence of his scientific discoveries in the 1740s, 1750s, his experiments with electricity, his remarkable ability to understand certain things about the physical world, and the inventions, everything from bifocals to a better stove. And so when he shows up in France, people know who he is. He's been given an honorary doctorate from Oxford. He's Dr. Franklin. When he goes through the streets of Paris, people run after him. It's like Mick Jagger showing up, except he's, well, Jagger's older now. Franklin's only a septuagenarian. French people have busts of Franklin on their mantles. He wears this funny little cap made of marten skin that he's gotten in Canada. And there are soon all the French ladies are wearing marten skin pelts on their heads. And he shows great patience as a diplomat. It's a virtue. He shows great cunning. And he uses his fame to great effect. First of all, he loves the adulation. He really likes being famous. He uses it to work his way around the French court. There's great enthusiasm in France generally, particularly among the upper classes, for the American cause. They see the Americans striving for something that France does not have. It is an absolute monarchy. The king, his rule is absolute. You don't get the vote in France. And there's something that the Americans are striving for that the French really respond to. And Franklin knows this, and he plays it for all it's worth.
So what is the American cause at this moment? I mean, first of all, do they call themselves Americans?
Yes, they call themselves Americans. Yeah, the first book of this trilogy is The British Are Coming. Paul Revere famously, supposedly cried, "The British are coming," as he rode through the Middlesex countryside on the first day of the war, April 18, 1775. That's not what he said. It wouldn't have made any sense to people who at that moment still thought of themselves as British. What Revere is quoted as calling out over and over again is, "The regulars are coming out," meaning the regular British Army. But by this point, we think of ourselves as Americans, we refer to ourselves as Americans.
So is America an idea, or is it a place in the fate of the day? And when we meet these people, what are they fighting for? Self-governance? And last, how close were they to losing? Put us in the room here about just how tenuous this war might have turned out otherwise.
Yeah, well, initially, when the war begins, and of course there's been a 10-year run-up to it where there are disputes over taxation and self-rule and other parochial complaints. The Americans, for the most part, in New England and in the mid-Atlantic colonies, the southern colonies, had been left alone for more than a century, and they were accustomed to a certain benign neglect from Britain. Sovereignty is not really a question for them because you've been able to elect your own leaders in your towns and so on. It's the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War as it's known in Europe, that changes the dynamic because Britain has defeated France and Spain, and in the peace of 1763, Britain has created the first British Empire. They have received, among other booty out of their victory, Canada, 500 million fertile acres west of the Appalachians, several more rich sugar islands in the West Indies, parts of India. So they have an empire now. They're deeply in debt as a consequence of the war costs, and they leave several regiments in America to try and maintain peace on the frontier between Indians and colonials who are pressing westward. All of them want to go to Michigan, there's no doubt about that. And so the fact that you've got British troops posted there, and when trouble begins to stir in an earnest way in Boston, some of those troops are put in Boston. The causes of the revolution are manifold, but it's basically over an insistence that we be allowed to control our own destiny. Taxation is an issue. Americans are taxed at about 1/50th of the rate of British citizens. It's a very small amount, but we have no voice in it. The local legislatures cannot have a voice in it. We have no representation in Parliament. And this is brews, and there are bad feelings and there are recriminations. There's gunfire in what's called the Boston Massacre. So this is going to build up to the famous April 19th conflict at Lexington and then Concord. Initially, there's not thought of independence. That is not part of the game. Initially, the demand is for greater autonomy, for a relief from any taxation without representation, famously. I live in the District of Columbia. That is on my license plate. No taxation without representation, because I live on the last plantation. I have no representative in Congress. Don't get me started. As the war begins, the demands, the sentiments harden. And in January 1776, there's a British polemicist named Thomas Paine. He's emigrated to America, and he writes a treatise called Common Sense. And he gives voice to what had been largely inchoate. He articulates in very easily readable terms what it is that we should be striving for. One of the things that he insists is that the royal brute, George III, your last king, should not be our king. We should not have a monarchy. He says it's ridiculous, this absurd ancient custom of handing down from father to son rule over people. And people say, you know what? That's right. That's right. And so that's going to lead to July of 1776, the Declaration of Independence. Grievances are laid out at great length. It's really quite a boring document once you get past the first couple paragraphs. And an assertion that what we're fighting for is independence. So that's where they are.
How do you, you've said that you've had a fascination since as a young boy about the question of what people are willing to die for, the ideas that we're willing to really put our lives on the line for. Is that true? And is that maybe how you entered into this story?
I think that, what I believe about the revolution and why I'm spending so much of my life on it is that it does tell us a lot about who we are, where we came from, what our forebears believed, and the most profound question any people can ask themselves, what they were willing to die for. I think that should resonate with us as we swing into the semi-quincentennial, which sounds like a medical procedure. It was actually the 250th anniversary of the birth of this country, and it began last month with the 250th anniversary of Lexington and Concord, and it will continue for the next 8 years, really. And one of the things, as we celebrate it and commemorate it, that we should think about are these fundamental questions. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why it does continue to fascinate me.
What were the surprises that you had and people that you met? I mean, take us, I know you talk about researching King George and what that was like. How did you do that?
Yeah, well, King George is really an interesting character. He is not the royal brute that Thomas Paine calls him. He's not the tyrant that Jefferson calls him in the Declaration. He is not the sinister ninny who prances across the stage every night in Hamilton, singing "You'll Be Back." He is a constitutional monarch. He's a patriot king. He's a child of the Enlightenment. He's deeply committed to the arts and the sciences. He's a patron of both in a very substantial way. I got to know him, and I live with him every day. In late 2015, Queen Elizabeth II, then still alive, obviously, opened up to outside scrutiny the Georgian papers, which she owns, as part of a project to digitize and catalog the papers of all four Georges who became king in the 18th and 19th century. There are about 500,000 pages, most of them previously unpublished, most of them belonging to the George III, because he was king for almost 60 years. And I was among the first allowed in to take a look for a whole month in April of 2016. The papers are kept in Windsor, 20 miles west of London, and every day I would flash my badge at the Henry VIII gate to get into the castle, and it's a real castle. And then at the Norman Gate, and I would climb 102 stone steps and 21 wooden stairs to the garret of the Round Tower, begun by William the Conqueror in the 11th century. And there are the papers. George, until late in life.
Are they on a table?
They're in, the Brits put their official papers in big, gorgeous red binders. So they're bound, but George, until late in life, when he began to go blind, was his own secretary. He wrote most of his correspondence himself. He made the copies himself. And so you have a very tactile sense of being in his presence. And, among other things, he's a great list maker, lists of all his regiments in America from 1766 to 1775, with the number of officers, rank and file, and musicians tabulated in his arithmetic scratchings in the margins as he does his sums. Recipes that he writes out for cough syrup, for insecticide.
Were you alone in the room with these papers?
Yeah. Well, they're watching me carefully. They know I'm an American.
What was it like? What did it smell like? I mean, what did it sound like?
It smells like old paper.
Yeah.
And you're on the top of the Round Tower. You're up very high.
When you look out, what do you see from the Round Tower?
You see the Thames.
Oh, wow.
The Thames is right there. And there's always one of the British military regiments. The Queen was in residence for the whole month of April. It was the year she turned 90. So it was one big party in Windsor, I'll tell you. And you hear the band of the Royal Guards playing periodically. So it's very evocative, and so you really do feel like you're in George's presence.
Was there a moment when he snapped into focus for you, and you began to hear his voice or understand him in a deeper way?
I think that month he came to me. He married an obscure, drab German princess, Charlotte, as in Charlotte, North Carolina, Charlottesville, Virginia. She learned to play God Save the King on the harpsichord during the voyage from Germany to Britain. They married 6 hours after they met. He had the marriage bedroom decorated with 700 yards of blue damask and large basins of goldfish. Because Doug Nothing says, "I love you like a bowl of goldfish." And seeing this, she produces children with lunar regularity, eventually to number 15. And seeing through the correspondence and through the other papers, the relationship he's got with her. It's a loving marriage, not always the case among 18th century monarchs. He's a devoted father. And I can see him struggling to do what's best for the monarchy, for his people, and for the empire. I have some sympathy for him. He's easy enough to dislike, I think, because there are other issues that we can talk about. But it's impossible to simply dismiss as a reactionary autocrat, because that is not who he is.
What's to dislike about him? You talking about the English policy abroad, or?
Well, he's extremely stubborn. He's going to wage war for 8 years against his own people across 3,000 miles of open ocean. And he's going to be relentless about it, to the point where he is determined that if his government does not follow the hard line that he insists in preventing American independence, he'll abdicate. He draws up papers of abdication.
He's concerned that Canada and Ireland might get an idea if America can have its own independence.
Yeah, that's right. He's operating with several strategic misconceptions. He and his government, his ministers, and actually both houses of parliament, majorities in both houses, House of Lords, House of Commons, believe, for example, that there's a big silent majority among the 2 million white Americans, and that silent majority is actually loyal to the crown. They're just waiting for an opportunity to remain part of the empire. That's wrong. It's wrong. He believes that the rebels will be cowed by superior British firepower, the greatest navy the world has ever seen, a large professional army, most of which is going to be in the colonies, fighting the insurrection. And as you allude to, he believes, the government believes, Parliament believes, that if the colonies are permitted to slip away in America, it will encourage insurrections in Canada, Ireland, the Sugar Islands of the West Indies, and it'll be the beginning of the end of the First British Empire. And it's not going to happen on his watch.
So this is the global war, right? When France enters in Spain.
Correct. Yeah.
But it's also, you say, a civil war. Let's talk about, just on the ground in the States, what is it like neighbor to neighbors? Let's say you and I are neighbors, and I'm supporting the cause for independence, and you're a loyalist. How do we get along with each other?
Do I have to be the loyalist? Can we switch?
Yeah. I'll be the loyalist. You go ahead.
Okay.
Guess first.
Yeah. It is our first civil war, and it's as nasty as every civil war is, and it does anticipate the Civil War, not in the causes of the conflict, but in the estrangement of American from American. George is wrong in thinking that there is a majority that are loyal to the crown. Modern scholarship shows that about 20% of those 2 million white Americans, and there's another 500,000 who are enslaved and black, but about 20% of those white Americans are substantial loyalists. They're convicted. They're going to remain loyal more or less throughout the 8 years of the war. That's not enough, as it turns out. It's not enough to. They have no national leaders. They're poor at propaganda, unlike the rebels who are brilliant at it. And even though tens of thousands of them are going to take up arms on behalf of the crown, that is never enough to swing the cause against Washington and the Continental Army.
Give us an example of the propaganda. That's interesting you just said that. I mean, pamphleteers, what was the mode of communication that day? How did we spread ideas?
Yeah, well, I mentioned common sense, which is one of the great political tracks in our language. I'll give you an example of how deft they are at this. Okay, the war begins April 19th, 1775. The British are marching to Concord to seize what they know to be stores of gunpowder and other munitions there. And in Lexington, there's a shootout. It's not really a battle. It's not really a skirmish. It's a massacre. 8 Americans are killed. They go on to Concord. There's pretty serious gunfire in Concord, and the British are chased back into Boston.
Who started the gunfire?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
There's a gunshot, rings out at Lexington. Nobody knows. But that's kind of the point that the Americans are making in the propaganda. So this long day ends. The war has begun. There are many dead on both sides. The 20 miles between Concord and Boston is strewn with bodies. Humans, horses, cattle. It's pretty dire. The British are back in Boston. They're entrenched. The Americans immediately charter a ship. It's called the Cuero. It's a fast ship. They immediately go out and get affidavits from witnesses, some of which are even true. There are newspaper accounts published immediately, the next day, of what has happened, and the narrative has been controlled by the rebels. And the point is, in both the affidavits and the newspaper accounts and all these things which are going to be put on the Cuero and sent to London, the narrative is they started it. They're killing women and children and old men. We are aggrieved for no reason. We are innocents. They seize the high ground of controlling the narrative. The Cuero crosses in a month to London, which is very fast for those days. It's 2 weeks before General Gage, who's the British commander in Boston, manages to get this slow brigantine. He writes 4 paragraphs which do not contradict really the American version of things. And the last line is, by the way, the rascals have us surrounded in Boston. So right from the beginning, this is brilliant, really brilliant.
You've said that there were myths that you wanted to dispel about the American Revolution, that there were things that had been too sanitized. What were some of those myths that have been sanitized? And take us into I guess what you call the brutality of this war. What don't we understand about the American Revolution?
I think that today, 250 years later, we have a tendency to look back on it and it's kind of gauzy and it's like a faded lithograph and it's not terribly violent. And, you see a picture of a farmer leaving his plow in the furrow to take a musket and rally to the cause of freedom. That's not what it's like, really. The war is incredibly violent. The war is relentlessly miserable for everybody involved. Killing, unlike the 21st century, wars that you and I have written about, is usually very close range, eyeball to eyeball, often with a bayonet. That's partly because 18th century muskets are largely inaccurate beyond 80 yards. They're almost hopeless beyond 100 yards. On that first day of the war, for example, when the British go to Lexington, Concord, back to Boston, it's estimated that the 4,000 American militiamen who rally and fight the British on that day They fire about 75,000 rounds during the long day.
75,000?
75,000 rounds. But only 1 in every 300 rounds actually hits a redcoat. So the shot heard around the world probably missed. So what you have to do, and the British are really expert at it, is you close with the enemy and you attack them with bayonets. Battlefield deaths are a small part of the deaths overall. It's estimated that at least 25,000 Americans die during the cause, possibly many more, maybe more than 35,000. It's a larger proportion of our population to die in any of our wars other than the Civil War. And most of those deaths are from disease. Smallpox, known as the king of terrors, dysentery, typhus, known as jail fever, ship fever because it's spread by lice, and it is really virulent when among people who are in close quarters, like tents. Typhus is the great destroyer of armies over the centuries. And 18th century medicine is hardly worthy of the name.
You have a passage that says something like, almost a third of the country's 3,500 physicians served with the Continental Army, but only 100 had medical degrees.
Yeah. I mean, it's uncommon to actually have a medical degree. You learn by being an apprentice.
Treatment typically involved bleeding, vomiting, blistering, and purging, and some surgeons sprinkled burning gunpowder to cauterize wounds. Remedies included poultices of cow dung, rotten apples, or rabbit fat, which is my favorite, and therapies for dysentery endemic in Army bivouacs included castor oil, butter with beer, and hot lard with boiled eggs inserted between the buttocks. And of course, more bleeding.
More bleeding.
If those failed, a folk remedy called for whirling a black cat with a white spot around the patient's head 3 times. Is that true? I mean,
well, don't sneer if you haven't tried it.
Where did you get this information? Where did you find this? Do you remember sitting down?
Well, there's 200 pages of endnotes. It's some of it is from real physicians.
Yeah.
Benjamin Rush, kind of the father of a Philadelphia physician, kind of the father of American medicine, a great patron of women's rights before it was fashionable. Benjamin Rush is a properly trained physician. He's trained in Edinburgh, which is kind of the center of a decent medical scholarship. Rush writes about some of this nonsense.
So, if it's true then that it was so violent and so clutch, using edged weapons and bayonets, and this country was really founded in a very violent cauldron, a galvanizing moment of violence.
Yeah.
And I know I saw you on tape with Ken Burns, and you've participated in a large documentary. It sounds very exciting coming out. And he made this point as well. What does that say about us? So you called these people also ornery, these citizens. You seem to have enjoyed meeting them through their voluminous documents.
Yeah.
What did you enjoy, and are they ornery? And
are these people ornery?
Well, no, 200. Their ancestors were ornery,
Yeah. I mean, it's there's nothing wrong with being ornery. Okay. So these are people who have, for the most part, emigrated because they're disaffected for some reason. My people were Quakers, and they were pushed out of England, and they, arrived in Pennsylvania in 1699, and you multiply that by many, and they first of all, they're adventuresome or desperate enough to make this long voyage, dangerous voyage, into a wilderness for the most part. That says something about the origins of the country. And then it's violent right from the beginning. It's a violent life. If you're living in New England, you've been accustomed to 100 years of Indian attacks, often supported by the French in Canada. Life is violent. It's at risk at all times. It's what you live with. The disease alone makes life seem very fragile. It's the number of children who survive to adulthood is relatively minuscule. It's heartbreaking. So this is where we derive from that tradition, and you add to that political grievances, a sense of being put upon by this tyrant across the Atlantic, and you find that orneriness expresses itself in a readiness to be violent. The country's born out of violence.
What's interesting about you saying that, however, is that what it creates is this document. It creates this intellectual armature, which is not violent. It's about ameliorating the violence, right? That seems like a disconnect to me, a dissonant. It could have turned out very differently. They could have created another dictatorship or monarchy.
Yeah, well, it's not over yet. I mean, the contingencies of history are innumerable, and one of the things that Washington is at pains to stress over and over again from virtually the day he takes command of the Continental Army in July 2nd, 1775, he writes lots of letters to Congress, to governors, to committees of safety, to all those who control the levers of power in the 13, they're going to be states as of July 1776. And the subtext of his correspondence frequently is, I am your servant. I acknowledge civilian control of the military. There will never, ever be a coup while I am in command. They're very aware of Cromwell. It's a very fraught subject in the 18th century. That's a legacy that Washington has handed down to us. He reinforced it throughout the Revolution and then insisted on it when he was president. And that's why not only have we never had a coup, you and I know a lot of military officers today, and the idea of a coup is just, they recoil in horror at the thought. And that is part of the legacy that comes out of it. So, yeah, there's a great complexity to
there is, and it also means what you realize reading your book and studying history is so much of this is about the quality of the person, the leadership, right? If Washington hadn't been Washington, we could have ended up in a very different place.
Yeah.
Tell us who he is. He arrives in Boston, right, as Virginian.
Yeah.
When he looks at this rabble, what's his response to these?
He calls them dirty New Englanders. He's a Virginian, and he's given command of the Continental Army, in part as a recruiting tool, in part because he looks the part. He's had 5 years of military experience, including a lot of combat in the French and Indian War, as a Virginia militia colonel, always under superior British command. He's been out of uniform for 16 years, tending to affairs at Mount Vernon with the 577 slaves who lived there during his lifetime. But he's the obvious man for the job. He shows up at the Second Continental Congress in uniform. Hint, hint. He's almost 6'3", at a time when the average American male was maybe 5'7". He looks fantastic on a horse. Jefferson says he's the greatest horseman of his age. He has command presence. Every room he comes into, he commands the room. He's got defects. He's got feet of clay. He's got a molten temper. The man who proverbially could never tell a lie sure could prevaricate. In correspondence to Congress, after yet another battlefield defeat, he hedges the truth pretty substantially on a number of occasions. He's got attributes that are ultimately war-winning. He has an excellent eye for subordinate talent. He sees a 25-year-old overweight Boston bookseller named Henry Knox and somehow intuits that this guy's going to be the father of American artillery. He's got a genius for gunnery. He sees a lapsed Quaker anchorsmith from Rhode Island named Nathaniel Greene, and somehow intuits that Nathaniel Greene is going to be second only to Washington as the indispensable man for the Continental Army over the course of 8 years. Among other things, when things are really dire at Valley Forge, the Army is falling apart and the supply system has collapsed, He turns to Greene, who, like Washington, has a big brain organized for executive action, takes responsibility, makes decisions, attentive to detail. And Washington goes to Greene and says, I need you to be my quartermaster general. And Greene says, I don't want to. Nobody in history ever heard of a quartermaster general, quote unquote. And Washington says, you gotta. I need you to do it. And Greene does it for 2 years, and he's brilliant at it. So this is, part of Washington's capacities, and he's got a number of things that are make him a war-winning general ultimately.
So, but at some point, his own folks start to question his abilities, right? Is this after Valley Forge or right before?
It's during
Valley Forge.
Yeah.
I'm interested how he rallies. I'm interested if you could walk into the room and interview George Washington, what would you ask him?
Oh, boy, it's a long list of questions. Well, let's talk about the disaffection that some have for him. He's not a very good tactician. He doesn't see the battlefield spatially and temporally the way a great captain, as the phrase goes.
What do you mean, so I see the map, I see that the enemy forces are here, friendlies are here, that's spatially?
That's spatially, and who can get where, when, where is the enemy's weakness, where is my weakness, how do I intuit what's likely to happen? Napoleon, Grant, these are great captains. Washington is not a great captain. He makes mistakes at the Battle of Long Island in August 1776. This guy's been a surveyor. He should know the lay of the land. He should understand the ground. He doesn't go out and look at it, and he gets outflanked. The British come around, they're behind him. That's bad. And he nearly loses the army. It happens again at Brandywine. He doesn't go out and look at the land. The British outflank him again. They get behind him. He nearly loses the army again. So as a tactician, he's got issues. And after a while, this happens, and there are those in the army, subordinates, who believe that perhaps they should be commander-in-chief. Washington doesn't seem to be cutting it. And there is murmuring going on. It's never terribly serious. And one thing about Washington is he is a brilliant infighter. If you're going to pick a fight with him, you better kill him, because he's absolutely masterful at countering this kind of internal insurgency. He usually doesn't dirty his hands himself. He uses surrogates, the likes of Alexander Hamilton, John Lawrence, whose father is the president of the Continental Congress. And so he outmaneuvers these would-be insurrectionists in the army. He routs them. And his authority is never really challenged again.
Was he a quiet man? Was he? Did his voice or his personality ever come into focus for you? And how did that happen? Were you reading his papers? You go to Mount Vernon? Talk about that research.
Yeah, I've read volumes 1 through now 26 of the Washington papers from the Revolutionary War. They're each about 700 pages long. And so, yeah, I hear his voice there. He's a bit opaque, and he wants it that way. He has a portrait painted a number of times from life, and one of these portrait painters comments on his remarkably dead eye, because he doesn't want you to see in. He can kind of deaden his gaze. He's proverbially the man you never ever touch. He keeps a distance. Part of it is the mask of command that he wears. So he's hard to get inside, frankly. The letters, he has a loving marriage with Martha. She burns her letters. So we don't see that important relationship. She spends almost every winter with him in camp. She spends more than half of the war in Continental Army camps with him. She's his confidant.
Is she at Valley Forge?
Yes.
Yeah.
She's at all the winter encampments, which is really important to him. Once in a while you get a glimmer. He's not known. He's not a knee slapper and joke teller. Nathaniel Greene has a beautiful wife. She's from Block Island named Kati, and Washington is clearly smitten with her. And Kati also is in winter encampments frequently. And at one point, it's the winter of 78, 79, and they're in bivouacs in northern New Jersey, and it's really crummy weather and whatever. And so Washington and the other officers hold a dance. And Greene writes about how Washington and Kati dance together for 3 hours without stopping. And afterward, Washington jokes with her about stealing her from your Quaker preacher husband. That's about as close to ribald as he ever gets. So you get these glimpses. He likes the company of scamps once in a while. He's not a prude. He's got a wide circle of friends, probably overstates it, acquaintances.
How did he react? So I want to talk about some of the greatest hits, the surprising characters you met in your research. Benedict Arnold.
Yeah.
Washington he said something famous like, "Who can we trust now?"
Yeah.
After Arnold does, tell us what Benedict Arnold does.
Well, Benedict Arnold is a Connecticut merchant. His family has fallen on hard times when he's a boy. He's supposed to be going to Yale. His father's a drunk. He ruins the family finances. Benedict is apprenticed to an apothecary. He hangs out his shingle, Dr. Arnold. He's not a doctor. And does pretty well. And then the war starts, and he's committed to the cause. It turns out he is the best tactical commander on either side in the first 2 years of the war. He is born to lead other men in the dark of night. That's a real gift. And Washington recognizes it early on. He's badly wounded at the Battle of Quebec when we invade Canada. This is the semi-quincentennial of our invasion of Canada. All of you empire builders out there who think it ought to be the 51st state, I invite you to read chapters 5, 7, and 12 of The British Are Coming. It doesn't go well. And Arnold is shot, but he recovers, and he's going to be a singular presence at the two battles of Saratoga in September and October of 1777. Where he's heroic, and he's badly wounded again, same leg, shot in the same leg.
When you say, describe that heroism, is he standing on the field amid the gunfire? Is he charging? I mean, what does heroism look like in this kind of 18th century battle?
I mean, it's eyeball to eyeball, the enemy. Yeah, he leads. First of all, he organizes the counter to the British forces who are coming down the Hudson River. He is the battlefield commander. He's under General Horatio Gates, but Gates is back at headquarters where he should be. That's where the information is coming in. And Arnold is the man at the cannon's mouth. And the reason that he's wounded is that he is really in the thick of it on that day. He's got grievances. He's got, there are things that just eat at him. He feels underappreciated. Congress has not promoted him to Major General in due course, and they've elevated other lesser men, definitely lesser combat leaders than Arnold. It really eats at him. And he's going to be laid up for months with this bad wound in his leg. When he finally is able to walk again, his left leg is 2 inches shorter than it had been. Because he can't ride a horse anymore, he's put in as command of Philadelphia when the British evacuate Philadelphia. There he meets, his wife has died during the war, leaving him with 3 boys. She dies early in the war. He's got 3 young sons that he's left with his sister. And he meets a beautiful, rich, young loyalist named Peggy Shippen. And he's smitten with Peggy, he marries Peggy, and he begins to turn. And he's going to begin a treasonous correspondence with the British. He's looking for 10,000 pounds, which is a lot of money in those days.
He offers them West Point or something.
That's where his treason leads. That's volume 3. We can't talk about that yet, Doug.
Yeah, I don't know how this ends, but
yeah, it ends badly. But that's volume 3.
Wow, I mean, espionage is espionage.
Yeah, and it's only by chance that he's caught.
But who's in charge of this? Because Washington shouldn't have let this happen. Did no superior look down and say, this guy needs attention, otherwise he's going to go off the rails here?
No. And Washington is supportive of Arnold right up until the day Washington happens to be at West Point. He arrives at West Point just as Arnold's treason is uncovered. That day, Peggy Shippen is left behind, the wife, Mrs. Arnold, and she, there's this, I'm ruining volume 3,
Wait, who wins? Who wins?
Who wins?
Yeah.
No, that I'm sorry, you're gonna have to buy volume 3. But she feigns hysteria, and she's running around with her basically undressed. When Washington arrives, is there a problem? Because her husband has just left and fled down the Hudson River to join a British sloop down there because he's been unmasked. And if he remains behind, he'll be hanged. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's
volume 3.
That's a teaser.
Yeah. And you've already obviously started researching and writing volume 3.
Yeah, well, not writing, but I know the story.
This enormous research that you do, you said something astounding to me today, which I still can't get over. You said, I don't revise. And all of you, when you read this book, you will be blown away by the language, the voice, the diction, the tone, the word choice. How do you do that, Rick? Does it fully form in your brain? You sit down, you type, and it comes out, and you don't touch it? Or talk about how the story starts to come to life for you.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. It's always, writers always like to hear from other writers that they're doing something right. My process basically is to do all the research, and it's usually about 3 years of research for these books. And I put a mark on the wall, and I say, that's where I stop, because you can wander into the woods and never wander out.
You mean stop writing the book?
Stop doing the research.
Okay.
So if I don't have it, I don't have it. There'll be things I don't know, there'll be ambiguities, and that's the way it goes. You have to be comfortable with ambiguity, I think. And then I sit down and I spend, it's usually 6 to 8 months writing a big outline. I take all of the notes that I've got, that I've collected in these 3 years, and I go through line by line. I say, this goes there, nope, this goes there. And at the end of this process, which is really arduous and awful, I have a document, and the document for this book is 700,000 words. It's 3 times the length of the final book, but then I have a roadmap, and it shows me where in my files the particular information is. And when I sit down to write, I'm an old newspaper man, so I can type fast. I use this document, the outline, as a map. And I write about 1,000 words a day. I spend the afternoon rereading what I've written, and I'll change that to which, and then back to that, and that sort of thing. And then I might reread it in the evening, maybe even after a glass of wine, and then I'm done. I read it the next morning for momentum as I pick up the next day's writing. I don't go back and rewrite after that.
Wow. For instance, I want to ask you where you got this detail. This is at Valley Forge, talking about the huts and the bivouac and the accommodations. Every day a musket cartridge was burned inside each cabin to clear the miasma of close living. That too was futile. Muddy Forge, as soldiers called this place, was symmetrical, bucolic, and wretched. And here's the question. Barefoot sentries stood on old hats in an attempt to keep frostbite from their toes.
Yeah.
That is an amazing detail that ends a really fabulous paragraph. Do you remember finding that detail? Or it's one of 1,000, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's one of 10,000 or 100,000. I don't. There are memoirs of Valley Forge, soldiers who were there who survived. 2,000 American soldiers died at Valley Forge, mostly of disease and malnutrition. But some left, powerful accounts. There was a surgeon named Albigence Waldo who has, very vivid accounts. I spent time at Valley Forge. The former historian at Valley Forge, who's now retired, I'd never met him. And I got an email from him one day, and he said, for 35 years, have been collecting material in Valley Forge. It's hundreds of thousands of pages. You want it?
You mean like pamphlets, biographs?
No, he's collated it all, and it's in Word documents, and it's all annotated where it comes from originally. It was not particularly well organized, but so I said, yeah. There was so much I could only get through a fraction of it. I could not make my way all the way through, and it's organized by categories. So there might have been a category under W, winter living, or something like that. My guess is that hat thing, and again, it's I guarantee you, it's in the notes. Mm-hmm. You might have come from there. The people, the National Park Service at Valley Forge, they sent me a lot of stuff. They were really great.
So that detail would be in this outline.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really...
yeah, exactly.
Okay. We're going to go to questions here in just a moment. Do you have cards? Are there any cards that should be passing? Did anyone fill out any cards? Otherwise, if we didn't, we'll just ask for questions from the floor. They might be coming. We'll have you read here in just a moment. What you were speaking, as I mentioned, to the Writer Studio students today at North Ed. Thank you again. They asked an interesting question, like we're reading this book about the American Revolution, what does it tell us about today? Or what are the uses of history? And you raised an interesting point. You said, well, if we read history, we know that we faced many existential crises in the past, and maybe it's a balm? Or what is the value of knowing what's come before us and we've survived?
I think the utility of history, and it can be utilitarian in addition to just plain fun, operates on several levels. And one of them should be a recognition that as a people, we have negotiated our way through, survived, even triumphed over crises much worse than anything that we're facing right now. Existential crises. And they include the Revolution, the Civil War, the Great Depression, World War II, where the existence of the country is fundamentally at stake. And that should be encouraging to us, recognizing that we have found our way through, that we have resilience, that we have strength, that we have unity when we really need it. I think also, I mentioned this to those smart kids today, we're the beneficiary of an enlightened political heritage handed down to us from that revolutionary generation. It includes personal liberties and strictures on how to divide power and keep it from concentrating in the hands of authoritarians who think primarily themselves. We cannot allow that priceless heritage to be taken away. We can't allow it to slip away. We can't be oblivious to the hundreds of thousands who have given their lives to affirm and sustain it over the past 250 years. That's one reason to study history, to know history, and to draw on what we're going to do in the celebration, the commemoration of the semi-quincentennial.
What would you say, though, sometimes if you use that argument today in the airwaves, someone say you're just being political, Rick? And I would say, no, you're looking at historical record, which is if it looks like this and does this, then this is what's happened in the past. Is that your point here?
Yeah, that's exactly my point, Doug. The thing that the founders most feared, and they write about it at great length, and they construct a constitution deliberately propelled by this anxiety, is tyranny, in whatever shape it takes. They feared someone encroaching civil liberties. They feared someone failing to recognize that they had set up this construct in which power was divided between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. They were thinking this through pretty deliberately and pretty brilliantly. And so we should be aware of that. It should be something, it's our birthright. And it's very, very important that we not squander it.
So it's our birthright, so we shouldn't feel shy in saying that, right? You know,
Yeah. Do I seem shy?
no, you don't. But you don't see people. You don't. And I know you're not on Facebook, and I'm not really on Facebook. You don't see people on Facebook saying, "Well, by the way, you know, we fought the American Revolution over this. What's your point here?" I mean, that's not where this argument goes, right? But what you're saying is that's actually the foundational argument you could make against what you're seeing happening in the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not being political in a partisan sense, I think.
Right.
I'm being, I think, historically rigorous, and having devoted my life to this particular period of our history and understanding the heritage that we draw from that, I'm sounding a clarion call about it. It's one of the reasons I think people should be interested in that period in particular right now.
I do agree, and also I know when I talk to people in their 20s and 30s who have a lot of anxiety, as we often do, not just about politics, but about the world in general.
Yeah.
We mentioned this today to these students. And I have said to them, well, look back at it. It has been like this before, but only different. Mm-hmm. That argument doesn't seem to work with a certain demographic in America, and I don't know if that's because we're not studying history the way we did before. I mean, have you run into this?
Yeah, I mean, civics in general, you know, we can lament the lack of civics education in secondary school in particular. You know, you can graduate from Harvard without ever having learned a lick about American history. And that's, you know, you can lament a lot of things in this world. One of the ways to kind of counter that, to offer an alternative to ignorance about this particular aspect of our common heritage, is to try to present readable, fun, interesting, enlightening history. That's what I try to do. That's what you know, good narrative writers try to do. David McCullough once said, "There's no such thing in good narrative writing as a foreseeable future." So, you know, how does this end? So, as David Petraeus said to me during the invasion of Iraq in 2003, when there's this tremendous sandstorm blowing around and things are not going well, he said, our faces are 6 inches apart because the sand is blowing so hard. He says, "Tell me how this ends." Mm-hmm. Boy, was that the right question? Yeah, well, that's, you know, tell me how this ends can be applied over and over again.
That was in 2003, and you were traveling with him.
I was with the 101st Airborne for 2 months.
Writing a book called Crusade?
No, that was the earlier war, a different war. This one was in the company of soldiers.
Oh, that's right. You were in Iraq again, though, when you learned you won the Pulitzer for your World War II trilogy.
That was 2003, yeah.
Yeah. You got so many Pulitzers, it's hard for me to keep them all straight here. But
Please, Doug.
Hey, listen, we've heard your voice. Could we hear the voice of the book here? Would you mind reading a passage, and then we'll go to some questions?
Sure. I'll keep it short, because the last thing these people want to do is hear me read. Let's see, I picked out something fairly short. So this is fairly early in the book. And the British have come down the Lake Champlain, they've come down the Hudson Valley, and they're bent on cleaving the New England states away from the Middle Atlantic states. This is their strategy, and they've sent another expedition away from the Hudson Valley to the Mohawk River Valley. The Mohawk River runs basically west to east and flows into the Hudson. It's August 6, 1777. And as this force is coming down, there's a fort out there, and it's full of hundreds of Continental soldiers, and they're surrounded by this invasion force of British, German, Hessian, soldiers and their Indian allies. And so New York militiamen rally, and they're going to go out and relieve the fort, and they're going to go up the Mohawk Valley. And at a place called Oriskany, which is just south of the Mohawk River, they're ambushed. The Indians particularly have devised an ambush at this spot. It's known as I'm looking for the name here. It's known as the Place of Nettles. So this is as the fighting, and it's as intense as any fighting in the entire Revolution. It's one of the bloodiest battles of the Revolution. It goes on most of the day. And at the end, there are several hundred dead militiamen and a lot of dead Indians and some British soldiers. So it goes like this. Fathers and sons died together. Neighbor killed neighbor. Iroquois killed Iroquois. Parched men scraped holes in the bog and used their brogans to scoop out a few ounces of muddy drinking water. Gunsmoke settled in a dense fog over the road, and drum fire subsided to the heckling of sniper shots. An abrupt, violent thunderstorm at midday dampened powder and further cut visibility, halting the carnage for an hour. Corpses were stripped of canteens and ammunition. The rain stopped, musket fire resumed, but by mid-afternoon, after 6 hours of mayhem, the ambushers had begun to leak away, dragging their wounded. General Herkimer's men, and General Herkimer was the commander of the militia, the living, the dead, and those not quite either, still held the Place of Nettles when the last shot faded to silence, except for birdsong and the wounded men mewing like lost children.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you.
In that close quarters combat, did they know what they were fighting for? Or were they fighting to stay alive?
You know, Doug, as you know, the main reason that they fight to the death is for each other.
Yeah.
They're not fighting for, the Continental Army. They're not fighting for the Declaration of Independence. They're fighting primarily for each other. That's why men always fight as intensely as they do. It's this love that blooms on battlefields among comrades.
We've got some questions here from the audience. Describe the relationship between the Minutemen and the Continental Army.
Yeah, the Minutemen, it's a subset of the militia. The militia are part-time soldiers. You're a farmer, you're a shopkeeper, whatever, and you have kind of like the National Guard or the Army Reserve today. You drill with your pals, and when trouble starts, you are called out to reinforce the Continental Army. The Continental Army is a permanent force. Although desertion is so profound that Washington at one point says we shall be required to send out one half of the army to bring back the other half. So Minutemen in some New England towns, not all, not at Lexington, they didn't have Minutemen, but at Concord, Minutemen are specifically trained as kind of a light infantry force that can respond instantly. When the klaxon sounds, the bell rings, gunshots fired to summon the Minutemen, they're supposed to respond immediately. The relationship between the militia generally and the Continental Army is often difficult. Washington is, tearing his hair out over the militia because he feels they're unreliable. He feels that they're not particularly good in direct combat with the British. They tend to run away. But they have their uses throughout the war. The militia does, the militia in all 13 colonies. And among these uses, we talked about the Loyalists and the rebels. The Minutemen, the militia, think of the Taliban. They act as the Taliban. So if you have shown inclinations to support the king, And you perhaps have been friendly to the British when they've had troops in the area, and then they leave. It's the militia who are going to show up at your door. And they're going to say, you're going to sign an oath right now renouncing any loyalty to the king and support for the cause, or we're going to take your farm, we're going to put you in jail, we're going to beat you. Sometimes we're going to execute you. It's like that. That turns out to be very useful for Washington, that kind of heavy-handed. They provide scouting services. They're helpful in rounding up fodder for horses, food for the troops, and so on. So Washington grudgingly comes to accept the necessity of the militia, and they help in battle on a number of occasions. But it's an odd relationship.
Interesting. Thoughts and insights on Francis Marion. I'm not sure too many people know who Francis Marion is. The swamp.
Yeah, Swamp Fox, yeah. Some of you are old enough to remember there was a popular TV show called Swamp Fox. And it's about Francis Marion. This again is volume 3, but I'll mention as a teaser, Francis Marion is a South Carolina plantation owner who's a capable, again, he's in the South Carolina militia initially, and when the war moves south, in the last couple of years of the war, almost entirely in the South, and there's a lot of fighting in South Carolina in particular. The last chapter of this book is about Charleston, and there's an American army, Continental Army, 5,000 men, trapped and besieged by the British and destroyed. So 5,000 men are killed or surrender. It's a disaster. It's a disaster for everybody. Francis Marion is among those who kind of picks himself up. He's not in Charleston. He's in a drunken revelry. He's jumped out of a tavern window and broken his ankle, and he's recovering from a broken ankle outside Charleston. So he lives to fight another day. He's not in prison camp with many of his buddies. But he's going to be among those who lead a real guerrilla war against the British in South Carolina quite effectively for the next couple of years. Volume 3.
I can't wait for Volume 3. What year do you think that will come out? Do you have any idea yet?
I'm older and slower. It takes me about 6 years. It took 6 years for each of the first 2 volumes. If it's 2031, which seems like only tomorrow to me, that'll be the 250th anniversary of Yorktown, really the last big battle of the war. So I'd feel okay about that.
Okay, 2031.
Yeah, I'll be here if you will, Doug.
Okay, we'll be back. There are hundreds of famous words attributed to American patriots. Talk about some that are true and some that are not. By Dan DeGood, a 5th grade teacher. Maybe the British are coming is one of...
Well, that would be the one that comes immediately to mind. I don't know. I'd have to think of other, Nathan Hale. Nathan Hale is a Yale graduate, school teacher from Connecticut, and he's a captain in the Continental Army. And this is how clumsy things are. He's told one day the British occupy New York, and the Americans want to know more about where they are, where the positions of the troops and so on. And so they're looking for volunteers to do intelligence work. You'd appreciate this. And Hale volunteers. And the instructions to him are, wear civilian clothes, pretend like you're a teacher, carry some books, carry your diploma from Yale, and go walk around and see what you can find. Well, he does this. He's walking around with books, and he's got his Yale diploma, dressed in civilian togs, and he stopped. And immediately, first of all, he's been making drawings of the British fortifications, and they're in his shoes. They find this, and Hale is immediately tried. This is espionage. And the fact that he's not in uniform means that he is legitimately subject to execution. And he's executed. He's executed about 51st Street on the west side of New York is now.
Is he really?
Yeah.
Wow.
He's hanged there.
51st and what?
51st and, well, the contours of New York have changed so much, but it's basically 51st and 1st Avenue.
Okay.
It's not far from the United Nations.
Okay.
And he famously is supposed to say, as he's marching to the scaffold, "I regret that I have but one life to give for my country." He probably didn't say that. But he probably did say, and there was a British officer there who befriended him that night. He spent the night locked in a greenhouse, thinking whatever he's thinking on his last night on Earth. And he is quoted by this British officer as saying something not quite so elegant, not quite so memorable, but courageous. And recognizing that he's a casualty for a cause that he believes in and that he's going to give his life for. So we remember Nathan Hale. There's a statue of him outside the Justice Department on Constitution Avenue in Washington, as there should be. He is a patriot hero.
Here's an interesting one. There's two more here. Did Thomas Gage's wife warn Dr. Warren about the regulars' advance to Lexington Concord, in your opinion?
We are really in the weeds here.
Yeah, this is nerd time here. Go ahead.
They're good weeds, though. Yeah, Gage was the British commander-in-chief in Boston. The commander-in-chief of the British Army, to the extent there was an army in America. And he had married Margaret Kemble, who was an American. She was from New Jersey. And there are beautiful portraits done of both of them. And the portrait of Margaret Kemble is so alluring. It's just, you see her and she's just so present in this portrait. She has been accused, falsely, I think, there's no real evidence for it, because of her American sympathies. It's not clear that she had American sympathies. It's alleged that she and her husband were falling out. Well, they went back to England together and had several out, riding through the countryside in the middle of the night. One of them is Paul Revere, and the other is William Dawes, and they go by two separate routes, and they're both calling out, "The regulars are coming out, the regulars are coming out." I think Margaret is traduced with this kind of this kind of nonsense.
In the past, in this country, has there ever been a time when people have been removed off the streets and moved to detention centers?
That happens here? Really?
Well, this is the question before us.
Right, really? Yeah. I mean, it starts in 1775. I'll give you a poignant example. William Franklin is Benjamin Franklin's son. Mm-hmm. He has one child. William is, what was called illegitimate. We don't know who his mother was. Ben comes home one day, and he's got a common law wife by this point, and he's got this baby. And the baby is William, and the baby grows up, and they're very close. When Ben does his kite flying experiments and nearly gets himself electrocuted, William's at his side as a boy. And William is made the royal governor of New Jersey, largely through his father's influence. Benjamin lives in London for 15, 16 years. There is no greater enthusiast for the British crown for a long time than Benjamin Franklin. And he's going to have a falling out of the First Order and become a radical regicide. His son, royal governor of New Jersey, when the war starts, remains loyal to the crown. And there's a rupture between the two of them that is going to last forever. William is arrested, taken off the streets. There's no due process. He's put in jail in very harsh conditions in Connecticut. His wife grows ill and dies. This is Benjamin's daughter-in-law. Benjamin won't lift a finger on his behalf. The estrangement is so deep. And William never repents. He's going to eventually be exchanged and let out of jail. He's going to come back to New York where the Brits are still there, and he's going to leave and go to England for the rest of his life. They see each other after the war briefly, and the rupture is never repaired. That kind of grabbing somebody who's offended you in some way, and it's often the Taliban militia who are doing it, and they march them off to prison.
What's the law of the land, and what year is this approximately? Do we know? I mean,
what, for William?
Habeas corpus does exist, but it's not being enacted here at this time.
Yeah, habeas corpus is not. I mean, it's a concept. It's in effect in Britain,
right?
And you can suspend it under certain circumstances, as we know today. Lincoln suspends it illegally, but. The law of the land is not a law of the land. There is no judiciary, really.
Okay.
Congress is acting as executive, legislative, and to some extent the judiciary. So there is, I don't mean to oversell this, there is a kind of due process. There are people who are accused of, when Philadelphia is recovered, the British evacuate Philadelphia in the spring of 1778, there are 22 Philadelphians who are tried for treason. 2 of them are executed. The others are acquitted. Actually, brilliant defense. And they are given defense lawyers. They're permitted to call witnesses. So this happens. There is a kind of due process, but it's not always the case.
Last, this is, I was going to ask you this. My question was, what do you do when you're not writing? And this person asked, do you have a favorite time and room, I think they write? I mean, what does Rick Atkinson do when he's not with his historian hat on? Do you fish? Do you play tennis? How do you unwind? How do you wind?
Fish? You can fish?
Oh, you're in. Yeah.
Yeah, you're up here on the water. Yeah. I live near Rock Creek, which flows through Washington, D.C. in Rock Creek Park, and you may have seen that the Health and Human Services Secretary went swimming in Rock Creek with it.
Well, there you go.
I don't swim in Rock Creek. I'll tell you. I know what goes into Rock Creek is nuts. I'm a very enthusiastic gardener. I can kill anything, but I keep trying. I'm passionate about it. I have a pretty great garden, actually.
Is it a flower garden, vegetable garden?
I live in leafy Northwest Washington, and there's a lot of shade, so I'm good with shade plants, many of which originally came from Japan, Korea, China. I have 4 grandchildren. 5 years old and under. I can spend endless time playing brio trains and chutes and ladders and that sort of stuff. My wife just retired from the National Institutes of Health, 30 years there. Incidentally, they're taking a sledgehammer to the greatest medical research facility in the world. Taking a sledgehammer to it. Many people are going to die as a consequence. I know this intimately, firsthand.
Because research will be stopped, because...
They're disassembling really important parts of NIH. They're blocking grants that not only are researching life-threatening diseases, but they're strangling the pipeline of young MDs and PhDs who want to devote themselves to this kind of research. It's really bad. Of all the things that are happening in Washington, you may agree with some, you may disagree with some, but that is one thing that is really dumb. So I read. I've lived in Washington for a long time. I am part of the deep state, and but mainly I work. I work all the time.
Do you really?
I do. I work all the time.
7 days a week?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I do, yeah. Particularly when a book is in process. I work 7 days a week.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not healthy.
Well, listen, thank you so much for being here tonight. This has been a fabulous conversation.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you for joining us for this special presentation from the National Writers Series. Coming up Tuesday, May 20th at 7 p.m., don't miss an evening with Janine Cummins. Join the National Writers Series for an inspiring conversation with #1 New York Times bestselling author known for her novel American Dirt. She will talk about her latest release, Speak to Me of Home, which is a multi-generational story that spans decades and continents following 3 women, Rafaela, her daughter Ruth, and her granddaughter Daisy. From Puerto Rico to the American Midwest and back again, their journeys unfold against the backdrop of shifting cultural landscapes, personal sacrifices, and long-buried family secrets. Tickets are available now. Go to nationalwriterseries.org.